All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. We're so glad that you could join us today. With you today, you have myself, Jake Ellsworth. I'm Covestic's business development representative, and I will be your host and facilitator for this session. I'm joined by Eric Smith, IRM ServiceNow Platform Solution Consultant, and Mike DeAndre, GRC Advisory Solution Architect. And before I hand it over to them, I have just a few housekeeping items to get us started. To begin, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please post them in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat and we'll bring these questions up for Mike and Eric to answer as we go along. Please also be on the lookout at the end of the session for a quick survey on what topics you would be interested in us covering in the future. Next, the presentation will be sent to you following our session today. You can expect to see that in your inbox within the next couple of days, and it will also be posted on our website within the next 24 hours. And lastly, if you have any questions following the session, please feel free to contact myself, Eric, or Mike directly. Our contact info will be listed on the final slide. So to kick things off, I'll give you a quick rundown on Covestic. We're an elite ServiceNow services partner and began working with the platform in 2012, developing expertise across many areas of the ServiceNow product set. Something that truly differentiates Covestic from our other partners in our space is our focus on customer success, not just as it relates to a given project, but your ServiceNow instance as a whole. In other words, we don't just focus on the technology being implemented. Our consultants take the time to understand your goals, people, data issues, and processes that drive successful outcomes. We also stick around after implementation pretty often to help our clients run their ServiceNow environments in different capacities. So there's a quick introduction to Covestic. And without further ado, I'll hand things over to Mike and Eric to get into the good stuff. Thanks again for joining us today, folks. Eric, take it away.
Thanks, Jake. So a couple things that I'm really proud of about Covestic that I want to point out that aren't on this slide. One, we don't try to be all things to all people. On the left, you see the areas we've specialized in. We take that very seriously. That's where we invest. That's where we grow. That's where we focus. We don't try to lean over our ski tips and learn on your dime. And also 90% of our customers come back. I think that's really unique. No, I know it's unique. And I think it's a product of everything you're seeing here. So as Jake mentioned, I'm the IRM Platform Solution Consultant. I also run pre-sales at Covestic. I've been working on ServiceNow for 11 years now. Most of that time as a solution architect and business process consultant. And most of that on the GRC application within ServiceNow. Before that, got about a 15-year IT career, and that was in healthcare and financial services, two highly regulated industries. So the way I say it, I wasn't a GRC practitioner, but I was definitely a subject to it. So, I guess I've been lucky to avoid that, but I'm also lucky that I get to work with someone who has been a GRC practitioner. So Mike, if you would, give yourself a little bit more of an introduction.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Eric and Jake. Really appreciate that. So indeed, I've been a GRC practitioner for many years, and we'll be talking a little more about that here shortly. But currently, I'm the GRC Advisory Solution Architect here at Covestic. And what that really means is that I use my experience as a practitioner and a longtime compliance manager to help customers and potential customers of ServiceNow to better understand how they can get the maximum value out of the IRM suite.
Outstanding. So I've been wanting to tell this story for quite a while. One compliance manager story of why they chose ServiceNow for IRM and what happened with it. And that's you, Mike. You know that you and I have been working together for a long time and on a lot of different projects. And what I find is that customers always love having you on their project. It's almost like they can sense that you've been in their shoes and you truly understand the challenges they face. Now, I know your story, but today I'd like the audience to hear it firsthand. So let's talk about your background, your experience in GRC, and why you've been such a proponent of ServiceNow for GRC.
Sure. Okay, thanks again, Eric. Well, it all started with SOX. Shortly after the Sarbanes-Oxley Act became law, I was hired by EW Scripps, the newspaper conglomerate, to work with their IT department, their internal auditing team, and various business units to help try to figure out just how we were going to comply with SOX. And since the company owned like 20 different newspapers as well as 10 television networks, this was it was a pretty monumental undertaking. And we only had about a year to do it, to design, implement, and to document all the required processes and to put in place an effective system of internal controls.
Yeah, I remember those days. It was just like HIPAA. It seems like SOX happened really quickly.
It did, and it immediately became a business imperative. Non-compliance with SOX was not an option, and it's still not an option. So while we were designing our compliance processes, we were simultaneously trying to figure out what tools we were going to use to implement those processes. And of course, you know how it goes. We ended up using whatever tools we had on hand. And these were mainly general software tools like Excel and Word and SharePoint.
So I think I know, but tell me, how did that work out for you?
Well, somehow we actually managed to pass our first audit, which was a good thing, but in a sense, it was also kind of a bad thing. Here's what I mean. Because we passed our audit, the tools we were using, those generalized tools, were perceived as being sufficient, when in reality, it was exactly those tools that were making our processes so labor intensive and inefficient. And this inefficiency, it really placed a very heavy burden on everyone involved. So the burden of compliance on the IT staff, the auditors, and my staff was absolutely huge.
So if I can kind of play that back, the processes you designed, they were effective. They got the job done, if you will, but they weren't efficient.
Exactly. So, we ended up continuing to operate that way, relying on these tools that, they were kind of error prone. So we had to take a lot of care, had to be extra careful. And we continued operating that way until EW Scripps decided to spin off their TV networks division. And as you can imagine, that was another really monumental undertaking. We had to split out the IT infrastructure components supporting the TV division from those supporting the newspaper division. And this meant commissioning, decommissioning, and repurposing hundreds of servers and other components. And while we were doing this, we still had to make sure that both companies, the old and new, were SOX compliant. And ended up, after the split, I ended up going with the spin-off Scripps Networks Interactive, which I think most people recognize today by their TV network brands, HGTV, Food Network, DIY, Travel Channel, and a few others. And they've since been acquired by Discovery Communications.
So you went with the spinoff. What was your role then?
I became the Enterprise IT Operations Compliance Manager, which meant I was responsible for ensuring the IT organization remained continually compliant and audit ready with all applicable laws and regulations, not just SOX.
But you're still relying on all the old technologies you kind of described, right?
Yes, at first, but fortunately, the company was hugely successful. And as it turns out, and as it came into its own, budgetary restrictions started to relax, and the IT division started looking around for more modern ITSM solutions, and I simultaneously started looking around for GRC solutions. And it took a while, but the IT team, they eventually narrowed their search down to Remedy, and I narrowed mine down to really just a handful of dedicated GRC point solutions like Archer and MetricStream. And I have to tell you, some of those point solutions were very attractive and had a lot of nice features and a lot of bells and whistles. But while they were really nice to have, there were a lot of them that I just didn't see how I would use those extra features. But the main thing that really kept me from selecting one of those tools was they didn't really align well with our processes, and our processes had already proven to be effective.
Yeah, and I know you know this, but when we display some of these platforms, we see that a lot. A lot of those great whiz-bang features wind up being shelfware. So, if I can keep on that train of thought, though, tell me, there was a concern, it sounds like, about becoming less effective by going to a more modern solution. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I know that it sounds kind of funny when you put it that way, but remember, this was SOX compliance we're talking about here, where non-compliance could cost the corporation millions of dollars in fines, and violations could actually land the corporate officers in jail. And absolutely any unsatisfactory audits could really plummet the valuation of the corporation and its stock price. People could lose a lot of money. So SOX compliance was really nothing to mess around with.
Yeah. So what did you wind up doing?
Well, I got lucky. ServiceNow, which was the new kid on the block at the time, they showed up at our door, and they were competing with Remedy, and they actually had something new and different. They had a platform solution that actually had both ITSM and GRC, and they were already integrated. The integration was built in out of the box. So, I took a closer look. I did a deeper dive into the GRC module, and when I was playing with it, it was like, wow. The ServiceNow designers, it was like they had been peeking over my shoulder when they designed it. It maps so well and so closely to our existing processes.
So that's when you decided that's it. You're done. It has to be ServiceNow.
I did, or I should say we did, because the rest of the IT division was having, kind of the same experience evaluating the ITSM modules. So we went with ServiceNow. We became a ServiceNow shop, and we migrated all of our compliance processes into, at that time it was called the IT GRC application. In fact, I learned later that we were the first ServiceNow customer to migrate a full-fledged SOX compliance program from largely legacy tools and manual processes into the ServiceNow GRC platform.
So once you did migrate, did it live up to your expectations? Was it still that over-the-shoulder experience you described?
Oh my gosh. Yes, what a difference, let me tell you. We leveraged all the built-in automation features of ServiceNow. We automated everything we could. We automated scheduling of control tests. We automated pulling records for the control owners to review. We automated the periodic review of our policies, our procedures, and control designs, and even our testing procedures to make sure that they were always current. And we automated control activation and deactivation with the commissioning and decommissioning of servers. And what else? Reporting. We automated our quarterly SOX 404 reporting, which was required by law. And with all this automation, I have to tell you, my life as a compliance manager became a lot easier and a lot less stressful.
Nice. But tell me, efficiency wise, and I know that was a big focus. Did you get all the efficiencies that you were looking for?
Yes, definitely. We got everything we expected and more. I have to say, we got all those gains while really maintaining our effectiveness. And so while we had always passed our audits, we were now getting even higher audit scores. We were getting very high audit scores. And because all the information the auditors needed to plan and to conduct their audits was at their fingertips, as well as at our fingertips, these audit durations were drastically reduced. For example, previously audits took months to complete. And since we were audited at least quarterly, those audits often overlapped, which if you've been through a lot of audits, that can be a nightmare. But after going to ServiceNow, audits were now reduced to taking weeks to complete rather than months.
And speaking of audits, I know it comes next, and this is my favorite part. I don't want to give it away, but something really unique happened to you that following year, right? Go ahead and tell us about that.
Yes. Okay. So one day I'm sitting in my office when I get a call from the CEO asking me to come over to his office. So I go over, and as I'm approaching the office, I see most of the C-tier execs, the CEO, CFO, CTO, CIO, and they're all standing there, and like, I don't know what to think. So I go in, and they start applauding. Then the CTO hands me an award, the annual Scripps Chairman's Award, along with a nice little bonus check. And the Chairman's Award, it read, for innovative process improvements having a positive impact on the corporate bottom line. So, as it turns out, and I hadn't really been focused on this, but by migrating to ServiceNow, we had not only enhanced our operational efficiency, but had so drastically reduced audit durations and therefore the associated costs. And you know, audits are expensive, right? That the cost savings actually showed up as a small but notable improvement in corporate profits. So who knew? You know, my focus had been on process efficiency, on making everyone's lives easier, and I had never really thought too much about the overall effect this was having on the company's profitability.
I love that story. It's like a career-changing event.
It was. So over the next couple of years, and I think this was because of the efficiencies we gained when we went to ServiceNow, we ended up taking on more responsibility. I got involved in business continuity planning, championed a new lifestyle learning initiative, and then moved into the office of the CIO. And a few years later, I was invited to go into consulting. And, you know, I'll tell you, I actually jumped at the chance because I wanted to help other GRC managers, to help them better understand how they, you know, how they too could get the maximum value out of the platform. And over the years, since I've gone into consulting, it's been really exciting watching how the platform has grown and working with all the new IRM applications. Like they now have regulatory change management and business continuity management, which I wish I had had back then. But I think what's still most exciting to me is seeing that the core GRC function that I had personally leveraged so heavily, it's still there. It's embedded like like an evolutionary backbone of the entire ServiceNow GRC IRM product portfolio.
Yep, it's been a journey. So Mike, thanks for sharing your story. I do see some questions are coming in for Mike, and we'll be sure to get to them in a little bit. But first, if we can, let's spend some time talking about the GRC approach, ServiceNow takes, if you will, and we'll look at some common challenges, some success stories, and how all that's addressed. And bluntly, there are pieces of compliance and risk and resilience in every part of your organization, and they all cut across silos. And unfortunately, the silos are there because the reality is that not many organizations are very connected. There's bits and pieces everywhere. There's some that are connected. There's some that aren't, and you have to rely on all this to stay in a good posture, compliance-wise, to have the efficient audits like Mike described. And if you don't have something breaking down those silos, what you do have are high costs, poor decisions, and ultimately business disruptions. So Mike, does that previous state, does that sound familiar to you?
Absolutely. And one thing I'd just like to add is that, talking about breaking down those silos, compliance actually can help drive that, because compliance, when you need to comply with the regulation, that's the responsibility of everybody in the organization. So it kind of transcends silos. And we've often seen, Eric, you and I have often seen that it's pretty common for different department managers to really want to know how other department managers are meeting a requirement, what they did to comply. And so this often, it facilitates that communication and collaboration and cooperation between departments. So it kind of, helps knock down those silos, the barriers.
I love that. It's not just about the people. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not just about the process or the platform. Rather, it is about the people. And this is almost like a forcing function to get the people talking who maybe haven't before and get their systems communicating. Yeah. Well, unfortunately today, it's not just a conversation that we have to have about silos. The reality is that enterprises have a lot on their mind right now. COVID is causing massive disruptions, huge disruptions. It's changing a lot of things. It's moving a lot of things. It's bringing buzzwords like digital transformation into the now, where it's not just a like to have, it's an imperative. But this isn't the first crisis you faced, and it's not the first risk or disruption you've faced. Pandemics, extreme weather, regulatory change, cybersecurity threats, and all their myriad flavors, and their accelerating prevalence. They're all risks to disrupt a lot of things, to really stop you from doing your day job, so to speak. But during challenging times, we all know that keeping your customers delighted is super important, job number one, if you will. But making your team's work less challenging, less painful, that's also critical. And that's kind of where ServiceNow IRM comes in, especially as it's matured from its early days as just kind of a simple GRC ticketing platform, if you will. I'm quite honestly thankful that I've been a part of ServiceNow's GRC journey. In the early days, that's really what it was. It was just pretty basic tasking with some good data support. I remember probably about 2012 or so, I helped an oil field services company implement a risk management solution in ServiceNow, and it worked. It did what they needed. It ticked all the boxes, if you will, but it was very basic. But now ServiceNow IRM is something unique. It's cloud-based, it shares data across the enterprise, and it's also easier to implement. It's easier to use. It's easier to configure and maintain than all the other legacy solutions and point solutions like Mike referenced. It's also become an engine for ensuring risk and resilience are incorporated, that those disciplines are a part of business processes, and that's where it's become more integrated risk management versus just basic GRC. It's also just staying in the ServiceNow world for a moment. It's better together with other ServiceNow applications, not just IT service management like Mike referenced, but IT operations management, customer service management, having a good knowledge base and having it readily adopted, having a good user experience. All those things are critical, and they make IRM better, and IRM, by being around and being well implemented, makes them better. And as the industry transitions from GRC to IRM, you have to have a truly integrated system that uses a shared database to enable that data sharing across the entire enterprise. ServiceNow also, it enables continuous compliance. So unlike other solutions, ServiceNow can scale to detect changes in real time, all without impacting service, system performance or services to your end users. And also, compared to all the legacy GRC platforms, ServiceNow has a lower cost of ownership, and it's just bluntly easier to configure. And you don't have to take our word for that. You don't have to take ServiceNow's word for that. Gartner and Forrester have said the same, and it seems like every year ServiceNow creeps a little bit farther up and to the right in both of those magic quadrants for integrated risk management. So let's look at ServiceNow kind of head to head with some of the alternatives. Legacy GRC tools, the point solutions, if you will, they weren't designed for the frontline employee. So what that causes is risk isn't top of mind for anybody but the risk and compliance professionals. You wind up with a lot of isolation, both process, tasking, data across the board, and it leads to a lack of transparency. And without that engagement from frontline employees, from the business, if you will, you could expose the entire organization to regulatory failures. And you wind up executing on an incomplete picture of the overall risk posture. And then also what we see a lot is what I call spreadsheets and hope. Bluntly, we actually see it quite a bit. Manual processes, that initial state that might kind of describe using Excel spreadsheets or old databasing tools or Microsoft Word or SharePoint kind of cobbled together for a solution. That doesn't scale. It doesn't move quickly enough. It doesn't break down the silos. ServiceNow does. And what ServiceNow also gives you is level 3 automation. I'm going to tell you what that means. So if we look at level 1, that's bringing silos of unstructured data and information together and giving it some structure. And that helps, as an example, let's say a compliance attestation cycle takes 10 weeks. Well, maybe you can get that down to 7 or 8 weeks. Level 2, the driver is bringing the people together and driving some consistency behind process and taxonomy. And that's good too. It actually moves the needle. Now an attestation cycle that took 10 weeks might take 5 to 6 weeks. That's good, but it doesn't change the game, if you will. It doesn't get to some of the great things that Mike talked about with, when he said we automated this, we automated that, we were automating everything. That's that level 3 automation that ServiceNow can bring. And now you're bringing the systems and the machines together to eliminate the need for humans to be involved in repetitive tasks. You can just grab the data, infer from it what you need to for your controls, and move on. Get it to the auditors and move on, etc. And now that attestation cycle that took 10 weeks, it's automated. It can take a minute. And of course, missing in all this is level 0, and that's having nothing beyond that spreadsheets and hope land. And unfortunately, that's a situation that a lot of companies still find themselves facing. So if we can look at this, kind of in a real world use case where all of this comes together, let's look at a very typical use case, SOX compliance. You'd identify your requirements and implement your controls and monitor those controls using policy and compliance in ServiceNow. Then you'd tie that to your compliance risks and regulatory risks using risk management. And this is good because now the business knows what the stakes are. They know how likely those risks are that we're defending with controls, and also what they might cost the company if they actually are here, they're in our lap, and now it's not a risk, it's an issue, and we have to do something about it. ServiceNow helps you with that, ties it back to the policy and compliance piece. And then you have to demonstrate, prove that you're compliant with audit. ServiceNow also does this very well. Not only the tasking and the structure, if there's an audit that's large enough to be run as a project, that's right in ServiceNow. If there's external data that needs to be forwarded to the auditors, that can happen in ServiceNow. And when it's time for that next quarterly or yearly audit, you can copy the last one, apply some lessons learned, and move on. And then there's new stuff, like keeping pace with all the evolving regulations, new regulations, changes to old ones, using regulatory change management. And all this is in one cloud-based platform that plays nice, not just with GRC professionals, but also the business. Mike, did I leave anything out of that?
I think I would add, we should probably call it vendor risk management. Vendors introduce risk, right? And if your vendor isn't compliant, then in many cases, you're not going to be compliant either. So in ServiceNow, vendor risk management really integrates well with the policy and compliance application, so that you can tie, for example, you can tie questions in your vendor assessment questionnaire, your risk assessment questionnaire, to internal controls. So like if a vendor doesn't respond to a question the way you expected, then that control, the corresponding control for that vendor, can automatically flip from compliant to non-compliant and generate an issue. So, that integration, that ability to connect between your assessments and your control environment, it really tightens up your compliance program to ensure your vendors are complying with your requirements.
Yep, it's like you've told me, if a vendor brings a risk to your organization, it's not their risk anymore. That's your risk.
Absolutely.
All right, so key takeaways, that hopefully you're leaving with. Any process automation will improve outcomes. You have to be planful and thoughtful. As I've said before, automation applied poorly can just get you to a bad place better. We're not describing that. Good automation, but ServiceNow supports it. Enterprise visibility matters. There's value in a shared database, not the least of which breaking down some of those silos. Also, the ServiceNow IRM solution is evolving quickly, and it's worth considering. If you haven't taken a look at ServiceNow for GRC, IRM in a while, now's a good time. Let us help you out with that. And also, don't go it alone. When it comes to compliance, experience counts. Been there, done that counts. Let us help with it. If it's a assessment, if it's the implementation, That's where I hope we're headed. But also, if you've already implemented ServiceNow, IRM, and you kind of wonder what's next, we're really good at that. We have services such as Developer on Demand and also other managed services that can help you with the now what do we do? We have solutions for that. So Jake, with that, let's take a look at what questions we've gotten in.
Yeah, sure thing. So the first one we have here is for Mike. And the question is, you said ServiceNow GRC mapped to your compliance processes very well, but other solutions didn't. Can you tell us what was different?
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking. To be candid, I haven't really looked at those other solutions recently, so I suspect they may have matured. But I can tell you this: I asked ServiceNow about this one time, and they told me that when they are planning a new product, they go out and do an in-depth survey and analysis of the industry and all their potential customers, as well as their existing customers, and then they identify all those needs, and then they set out to design their product to meet like 90% of those needs. And so when they told me this, I'll tell you, it was actually kind of comforting because it confirmed that what we were doing was really consistent with what most people were doing in the industries, since our processes align so well with the ServiceNow product. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Mike, and if I could pile onto that one, actually, it's almost like they've been applying the Pareto principle, if you will, the 80-20 rule. That world back in 2012 where it was just basic tasking and it was pretty much just policy and risk, to where we are now. I've heard customers clamor for certain features in workshops. Policy exceptions was a good example. External control sources was a good example. And then, 6 months later, it's in ServiceNow. And I've seen that consistently. And ServiceNow, I think, has done a really good job at listening and giving back, but not over tailoring so it only matches a few organizations.
Yeah, they definitely have their finger on the pulse of what's happening. Yep. Any other questions?
Yep, we actually have another really good question. So the next one is, you focused on SOX, but how well do those processes map to other laws, regulations, and processes?
Another great question. Well, in my story, I focused on SOX because it was definitely our number one concern. But we also looked at it for scalability to other regimes. In particular, we looked at PCI, ISO 27000, et cetera. But since going into consultant, we've helped, Eric and I have worked on a lot of projects together where we've helped a lot of customers to set up compliance programs to meet other regimes like NIST 853R4, the cybersecurity framework, ISO, PCI already mentioned, but more recently the privacy laws, GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act, and others. And while they different, they also share sort of like a common base framework, especially in the process for complying with those laws. So like Eric showed in the earlier SOX slide, basically the answer is yes, ServiceNow maps very well to other frameworks and compliance regimes.
Cool. Jake, did that wrap up the questions? Did we have some more come in?
Yep, that did wrap it up.
Perfect.
Awesome, guys. Well, hey, you sure did cover a lot of ground today. And folks, like I said at the top of the session, we'll be sending a survey following, and we would love to hear which process areas that you'd like us to cover in the future. And as an additional reminder, we'll be sending you a recording of this session, and if any questions come to mind, please don't hesitate to reach out to Mike, Eric, or myself directly. We'll leave our contact info up here on the screen for just a second, and if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask, we'll keep an eye on the chat window for a minute. But if not, thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks for joining.
Hey, Jake,
Eric, yes.
I'm back. Okay, so we had a couple more questions come in. Sorry, I bailed out early. I thought we were all done. Okay, so there's a question around how does ServiceNow handle a unified control framework to help with audit prep for new compliance and certification? So there's a few options there, and they all have their benefits and things to be aware of. But ServiceNow integrates, one example, ServiceNow integrates with the Unified Compliance Framework that's UCF, and it has for a while to track frameworks, regimes, regulations, all the controls that those comprise, and changes to both. That does require a external subscription, but a lot of customers use it, especially if they have to comply with a big, broad set. We've also seen it integrate with other tools like Compliance Forge. There may be a little bit of work to get that connector set up, but we've done that, and Compliance Forge is a great tool for that as well. And then also there's another option. You can forgo both of those and import your own controls or create your own controls. And that there's certainly benefits to that too. You have a lot more flexibility, especially if you want to provide an additional wording that's a little more business consumable and get that out to the business. And if you go that route, you can use the regulatory change management module, which is new, to help identify changes to those frameworks and regimes and keep up with them. Hopefully that answered that. And then it looks like you had another one, Jake. If you want to fully utilize the IRM and GRC functionality of the ServiceNow offering, what components, modules, et cetera, are needed? At a bare minimum, I would say policy and compliance. So that's ServiceNow IRM policy and compliance. And what you can do with that is get your internal policies set up. Hopefully they are structured in frame of some of those external frameworks. Reference those external frameworks and get the controls that are pertinent to you set up. And then you can do scoping. So this applies to this line of business. This applies to this location. This applies to these servers, these databases, et cetera. A little bit manual, but at a bare minimum, that's what's needed. Now, to me, to be successful, it is very helpful if you already have a configuration management database set up in ServiceNow. So in that world, you would have already been using ServiceNow for IT service management or IT operations management. Then you get to scope your audits and scope your controls to things that the business understands and maintains. Very much a nice to have, a big success factor, by no means required. And then to pile on, both Mike and I believe that risk management really helps bring the business in. Because if the business just knows, oh my goodness, the compliance group is asking me more questions, or the auditor's asking me for evidence, oh bother, why? Well, if they see a risk, that's well defined, that has this percentage of likelihood of happening this year, and if it does, oh boy, it's going to cost us a couple $1 million, and that's a big deal. It can get the business a little bit more tied in. It also, risk management helps you decide what to focus on. The way one of my clients said to me, and I know this isn't for everybody, but I'm going to say it anyway. If there's a law that the fine for non-compliance is $25,000, I'm not going to spend $1 million to address that. It was a pretty parabolic example, but it speaks to the types of things that risk management can help you do. Quantify those risks and understand which ones are going after, which ones should be prioritized, those types of things. That's at a bare minimum. So let me reframe that. Policy and compliance at a bare minimum. Some type of CMDB in ServiceNow, I think would say that would be the next, I don't want to call it a requirement because you can get by without it, but it's a big success factor. And then you come up to risk. Everything after that is kind of gravy. I hope you take it all down, but that's the starter approach. Were there any other questions that came in after that, Jake?
Nope, it looked like that was it.
Cool. I'm going to actually bail now. So for those of you who stayed on to help me ramble through those two questions, I appreciate it again. And please send me an email if you've got any questions, or Mike. Mike, the way I say it is, well, I said at the top, Mike's our practitioner. He's more the business and process side. I'm more the ServiceNow technical side, but I also got a little bit of the process savvy. So let us know how I can help.
Alrighty, everybody. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.